Hi there, I'm just a little cat trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It's free. Just click subscribe right under this video. It would mean the world to me.
At my sister's graduation party, my mom pulled me aside, smiled tight, and said, "Claire, please, don't mention your award today. This is Abby's moment." And like an idiot, I said okay. But then the dean of my university walked through the gate, holding a plaque with my name engraved in gold. I saw my parents go pale. And my sister, she looked like someone had lit her damn dress on fire. I still remember the exact shade of the tablecloths, off-white with a weird glossy shimmer, the kind they rent for catered backyard events when they're trying too hard to make things look expensive. My mom had been planning Abby's graduation party for months like it was the freaking Oscars, right down to the way she instructed the guests on where to park, what time to arrive, and, of course, what to say. And more importantly, what not to say. I had barely walked 5 steps into the backyard when she intercepted me with that smile I've seen 1,000 times. The one that looks friendly to everyone else, but I knew exactly what it meant. Trouble. She took my elbow like she was guiding me to a crime scene and said it softly, like it was just a minor favor. "Claire, honey, please don't bring up the award today. It's Abby's day, okay? No explanation, no congratulations for the thing I'd just achieved that morning. Just a gentle nudge to stay in the goddamn shadows a little longer, like I had every other time someone wanted the spotlight a little more than me." I don't know why I nodded. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was because part of me still wanted to be the good daughter, the one who didn't make waves, didn't start shit, didn't make anyone uncomfortable by, God forbid, being proud of herself. My dad was nearby, sipping something brown out of a red Solo cup like he always does at these things, nodding like he agreed with her. "It's a big day for your sister," he said, like I needed reminding, like I hadn't spent the last 10 years watching them bend over backward to build a pedestal for Abby, while I paved my own path in silence. The backyard was full, probably 40 or 50 people, friends from Abby's school, old neighbors, some relatives we hadn't seen since Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Everything was decorated in blue and white, her school colors with a massive balloon arch over the buffet table that screamed, "Look at me." A giant banner hung from the fence that read, "Congratulations, Abby, class of 2025, in bold cursive letters. I stood there holding my little envelope, the notification from the National Academic Council that I'd been selected for the Dean Scholar of the Year award, a nationwide honor only one person in my entire graduate program had received. But sure, Abby's day. I stuffed the envelope back into my purse, smiled at my mom like I wasn't dying inside, and walked toward the drink table. A couple of Abby's college friends were laughing about something I couldn't hear, already buzzed off sangria, while a Spotify playlist blasted whatever overproduced pop song was trending that week. The same music Abby always played, stuff with no substance but a lot of bass. I was reaching for a water bottle when I saw him. An older man, maybe late 60s, walking slowly but deliberately through the side gate, holding something under one arm and glancing around like he was looking for someone specific. It took me a second to recognize him out of context, but when I did, I felt my stomach twist into something sharp. It was Dean Holloway, my dean, from the university, and under his arm was a wooden plaque with my full name engraved in shiny black lettering. You know that moment when the air around you goes quiet, even though there's still noise? That's exactly what happened. I watched him approach like I was seeing a dream start to go sideways. He walked right past the drink table, right through the crowd, and stopped 2 feet from me with this grin on his face, an actual warm, proud grin, and said, "Claire Martin, I knew I'd find you." I blinked like an idiot. "Dean Holloway, what are you? How did you—" He laughed like I'd said something funny. "Your program director mentioned your sister was graduating today. And when I saw the RSVP address on the internal email, I figured, why not make it personal? An award like this deserves more than a campus newsletter shout-out, don't you think?" That was when people started turning around. The music hadn't stopped, but conversations had started to drop out. My mom, standing by the dessert table, turned her head so fast I thought she might sprain something. My dad stood up straighter. Abby, on the far end of the yard, talking to two sorority-looking blondes, froze with a champagne flute halfway to her mouth. Her eyes locked on the plaque, like it was a grenade. I swallowed hard and tried to speak, but my voice got lost somewhere between my throat and my stomach. Dean Holloway patted the plaque and said with absolute horrifying cheer, "Couldn't let her get overshadowed again now, could we?" Then he turned and gestured toward the small speaker setup, like it was a podium, as if this party was now a conference room and I was the keynote speaker. I could feel every eye on me, and for once, it wasn't Abby who was soaking in the attention, it was me. And not because I demanded it, because someone, finally, had dragged it out of the dark and handed it to me in full sunlight. I should have smiled, I should have said something gracious, but I looked over at my mom's face first. Her smile was tight and frozen, like someone had yanked a wire behind her cheekbones. My dad looked like he was about to intervene, but didn't know how. And Abby was still standing there, hand frozen midair, her mouth slightly open like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I took the plaque, heavy and smooth in my hands, and all I said was, "Thank you, that means a lot." Then I nodded once, politely, and added, "Would you like some cake?" Like none of this was weird at all. Dean Holloway laughed again, oblivious to the tension in the air, and said, "Sure, let's celebrate." And just like that, the whole party had tilted. The sun still shined, the guests still milled, the drinks still poured, but something had cracked beneath the surface. You could feel it. I looked at my sister again, and this time, she didn't look proud or happy or even annoyed. She looked like someone who had just realized her throne wasn't nailed down. And I wasn't done yet. There was a very specific kind of silence that settled over the backyard, one that didn't come from lack of music or conversation, but rather from the weight of something unspoken taking up too much space, the way a storm builds before the lightning strikes. Dean Holloway, in his tan linen jacket and thick-framed glasses that always seemed to slide halfway down his nose, stood there holding the plaque like it was a newborn child, and I was the proud mother. The moment should have felt like triumph, like validation for every late night I stayed up grinding through research papers, every time I took the night shift at the bookstore to afford a semester, every quiet instance when I swallowed my own pride, because someone else in the room wanted the attention more, but instead, it felt like I was holding something radioactive, something too hot to touch without burning myself. He asked if he could say a few words, and before I could answer, before I could politely deflect or steer him toward something less dramatic, he was already turning toward the crowd, lifting his hand in the universal signal for, "Quiet down, I've got something important to say." I could see the panic forming behind my mother's forced smile and the hesitation in my father's posture, the way he shifted from foot to foot, like maybe if he looked busy enough, he wouldn't have to participate. But it was Abby who drew my eye again because she hadn't moved, not an inch. Her champagne glass was still held perfectly upright, her lips frozen in a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and her entire body looked like it was locked in place by pure fury she hadn't figured out how to contain yet. Dean Holloway cleared his throat and began speaking, his voice strong and practiced, the way only someone used to commanding auditoriums full of bored undergrads could deliver. He spoke of excellence, of consistency, of someone who rose above challenges without asking for recognition. He talked about leadership that was quiet but effective, achievements that spoke for themselves when their owner never would. He talked about me like I was some fable, some example of what could be accomplished with enough grit and patience, and with every word that left his mouth, I felt something tighten in my chest, not because I was embarrassed, but because I was seen. Really seen, maybe for the first time in a public setting that wasn't academic or professional. And as strange as it sounds, that kind of visibility isn't always freeing. It's terrifying, especially when you've built your life around being invisible to keep others comfortable. By the time he finished, the backyard was quiet again, not because they were unsure how to react, but because they weren't sure if they were allowed to. There's an etiquette to these kinds of events, a a social script that everyone silently agrees to follow, and Dean Holloway had just torn a hole through the middle of it by placing a spotlight where no one had planned for one. Eventually, someone clapped. Maybe one of my old high school teachers who'd been invited by my mom out of courtesy, and slowly others joined in, their applause hesitant, scattered, like they were unsure whether they were supposed to be celebrating or politely pretending nothing happened. I turned toward Dean Holloway, thanked him as sincerely as I could manage under the circumstances, and tried to step away, hoping the tension would diffuse itself if I just didn't feed into it. But he wasn't finished. He leaned in, dropped his voice just enough for the nearest people to hear, and said, "We couldn't let her outshine you twice, now could we?" And he smiled when he said it, like it was just a light-hearted comment, a passing joke, but the words landed with the force of a brick thrown through glass, because he didn't know. He couldn't have known. He didn't know about the first time. It was 5 years ago, back when Abby was graduating high school as valedictorian. That night had been the first big one, the one where the entire family, grandparents, cousins, neighbors, everyone, gathered in the same backyard, under the same string lights, and toasted her with homemade sangria and a 2-tier cake with gold letters. What no one talked about, not even after, was that I had gotten my acceptance letter to Stanford that same week. A letter I hadn't shown anyone because my parents sat me down that Sunday morning and told me, kindly, firmly, that we just couldn't afford to send 2 girls out of state. "Abby's grades are excellent," my dad had said, as if mine hadn't been, as if I hadn't worked just as hard. "And she needs this more than you do," my mom added, rubbing my back like that would make it sting less. "You're tougher, Claire. You'll figure it out." So I did. I declined the offer, took community college courses at night, transferred to a state school, worked part-time every semester, sometimes 2 jobs at once, and I did figure it out. I clawed my way through graduate school with scholarships and freelance tutoring gigs. I earned every inch of my success, but no one ever brought it up at family gatherings. No one ever toasted me, not once. So when Dean Holloway made that joke, that offhand comment about not letting me be overshadowed again, it was like the universe decided it was finally time to twist the knife in the opposite direction, to let the blade find new flesh. Abby finally moved after that. She didn't make a scene, not then, but she walked away from her friends, walked straight past the drink table, past the folding chairs, and disappeared into the house without a word. She didn't even glance at me, but I knew exactly what was coming next, because I knew her. I had known her all our lives, and if there's one thing Abby Martin couldn't stand, it was being sidelined in her own story. Dean Holloway clapped me on the shoulder, told me to soak it all in, and wandered off to make small talk with someone holding a plate of mini quiches. The party around me began to rearrange itself, as parties often do when the air shifts. People went back to their drinks, back to their conversations, but nothing felt the same. I stood there with the plaque in my hands, the wood warm from the sun, and I felt different. Not vindicated exactly, not triumphant, just seen. But it wouldn't last. I could already feel it slipping. And Abby wasn't done with me, not even close. The moment I stepped into the hallway leading to the guest bathroom, I could already feel the static in the air. Like the leftover tension after someone's yelled in a room and slammed the door. Only the door hadn't slammed yet, and the yelling hadn't happened. But it was coming, hanging there between drywall and silence, inevitable. I walked slowly, partly because I didn't want to seem like I was chasing her, but mostly because I needed to catch my breath, to process what the hell had just happened out there in the backyard, with my name echoing through borrowed speakers and my mother's eyes darting around like she was trying to contain a fire without letting anyone smell the smoke. The door was closed, but not locked, and I knew Abby well enough to guess she didn't want an audience, not yet. I paused, took a breath, and knocked once, not loud, not soft, just enough to say, "I'm here, and I'm not pretending anymore." She didn't say anything for a second. Then came the sharp click of the lock, not from the inside, but from me trying the knob and realizing she had locked it, which wasn't like her. Abby didn't hide when she was upset. She performed. But this wasn't a tantrum she could spin into something charming. This was something raw. I just want to talk, I said, keeping my voice calm, though every muscle in my neck felt like it was coiled and ready to snap. She didn't answer, but I heard movement, a shuffle, maybe something being set down on the counter, and then finally the click of the lock releasing. When I pushed the door open, the first thing I saw wasn't her face. It was her reflection, caught in the mirror above the sink. Red around the eyes, a smudge of mascara under one lid, her hair falling out of its carefully pinned bun like the unraveling of a ribbon someone had tried too hard to tie. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me through the mirror, and for a long-waited second, we stood there in silence, the cheap bathroom fan buzzing faintly in the ceiling, the scent of lavender air freshener trying too hard to cover up the tension in the room. "Are you happy now?" she asked eventually, her voice not broken, not teary, but sharpened to a point, like a nail she'd been filing down all afternoon. I didn't answer right away because part of me wanted to lash back, to say something biting and immediate, but the other part, the one that had lived under her shadow for too many years, knew that wasn't the way. So I just leaned against the doorframe and folded my arms, the plaque still tucked under one elbow like a secret weapon I hadn't quite decided to use yet. "I didn't ask for any of that," I said quietly, deliberately. "I didn't even know he was coming." "But you let him speak," she snapped, turning to face me now, eyes narrowed, arms crossed in that same posture we both inherited from our mother, defensive but elegant. "You stood there and let him humiliate me on my day." "Humiliate you?" I repeated, not even pretending to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Abby, it was a 2-minute speech. He didn't even mention you." "Exactly," she fired back, stepping forward. "He didn't have to. You knew what it would do. You could have stopped it. You could have said, 'Not now, this isn't the time.' But you stood there and soaked it up like you've been waiting your whole life for someone to clap for you." That one landed harder than it should have, not because it wasn't true, but because it was. Because maybe I had been waiting, maybe not consciously, but in that deep, small place where resentment and loneliness live side by side, growing quietly like mold behind drywall. I'd waited for someone, anyone, to say out loud that I mattered, that my work wasn't invisible, that I was more than just the smart sister who kept things running while Abby dazzled the world with her charm and chaos. I pushed off the doorframe and walked farther into the bathroom, setting the plaque gently on the edge of the counter beside her makeup bag, which was unzipped and spilling over with overpriced foundation and highlighter sticks. I met her eyes in the mirror again. "I didn't ask for this," I repeated, this time more firmly. "And for the record, I wasn't going to say a damn thing today. Mom asked me to stay quiet, and I said fine, like I always do, Abby. But he came anyway, and I wasn't going to shove him out the door like some dirty secret." She looked at me then, not the way a sister looks at another sister, not with love or frustration or any of those familial things, but with something closer to suspicion. Like she was realizing, maybe for the first time, that I had teeth, that I wasn't going to roll over this time. She stepped closer, her voice dropping low. "You think you're better than me because you suffer in silence, because you work hard and never complain. But let me tell you something, Claire. Being the center of attention isn't easy either. Everyone expects me to be perfect, to always smile, to always have something witty to say. You think that's fun? You think I don't get tired of being the one everyone watches?" I blinked at her, stunned. Not because of what she said, but because I finally realized just how much of her identity was wrapped around being seen. Abby didn't want attention. She needed it, like oxygen, and today, for the first time, she hadn't been able to breathe. "I don't think I'm better than you," I said, my voice level. "I think I'm done playing small so you can keep pretending you're the only one who matters." The words hung there, dense and final. Abby stared at me like she didn't recognize the person who'd just spoken. And maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't either. But I wasn't taking them back. Then, like some drama teacher from a high school stage play, she reached for the makeup brush holder beside the sink and threw it, hard, at the mirror. It hit with a sharp crack, bouncing off without breaking the glass, but the gesture was enough. Enough to make a statement. Enough to prove the moment had cracked something deeper than just the surface. I didn't flinch. I just picked up my phone from my back pocket, clicked off the voice recorder that had been running for the last 3 minutes, and slipped it into my purse. Not for revenge, not for drama, just for clarity. Then I turned, picked up my plaque, and walked out of the bathroom without another word, leaving her to stare at her own reflection in the mirror she hadn't managed to break, yet. But something told me, deep in my bones, that the next crack was coming. And this time, it wouldn't stop at glass. By the time I made it back out to the backyard, the light had changed. That particular late afternoon hue that paints everything gold for exactly 20 minutes before the sun ducks behind the trees and takes the warmth with it. The music had resumed its place in the background, safe and forgettable, a crowd-pleaser playlist meant to fill space without ever demanding anyone's attention. People were talking again, nibbling at whatever hadn't dried out on the catering trays, pretending not to notice the energy shift that had curled its way through the celebration like a cold draft under a locked door. But I could tell that something had settled differently, like the party was continuing out of obligation, out of inertia, rather than any true momentum. Abby was nowhere to be seen, and though a few people glanced toward me with vague curiosity, likely wondering what had happened inside that bathroom, no one asked, and I didn't offer. The plaque, heavy in my hands, had begun to feel less like a trophy and more like a reminder, not of victory, but of how much had gone unspoken over the years, how much I had let slide, let stew, let fester quietly in the corners of family dinners and shared holidays, and those 1,000 small moments when I had chosen peace over presence. I didn't stay long after that. I offered a few polite goodbyes, nodded when someone I barely recognized told me how proud they were to see a smart girl like you finally get the spotlight. And I even managed to smile when my father gave me one of those awkward one-arm hugs that feel more like a truce than affection. My mother didn't say much, just touched my arm lightly as I passed by, eyes darting nervously toward the house, as if Abby might come storming out at any moment, ready to deliver some final act of fury that would ruin what little peace remained. But she didn't. She stayed inside, and I left. By the time I got home, the air had cooled, and the sky had shifted into that deep blue that only exists for a few minutes before full night takes over. I set the plaque down on my kitchen counter, next to a stack of unopened mail and a half-finished cup of tea that had long gone cold. And I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it, my name, engraved in clean serif font, the words National Dean Scholar of the Year beneath it. It should have felt like a milestone, a turning point, something worth celebrating, but instead, it felt like evidence in a trial I didn't know I was about to be part of. The email I sent that night was short. Not petty, not cruel, just pointed. I attached the voice recording from the bathroom, not the entire thing, just the part where Abby accused me of humiliating her. The part where she said, "You could have stopped it. You let them see you. You let them forget me." I knew it would sting, and maybe that was the point. I'd spent my whole life walking carefully, never letting the words I wanted to say come out raw and real. But this time, I didn't edit myself down to the version they could digest. I sent it to both my parents. No explanation, no subject line, no commentary, just the file, just the truth. It didn't take long. The phone call came less than 30 minutes later from my father's number, though it was my mother who spoke first, her voice soft, controlled, the kind of soft that masks fear with politeness. She started with concern. "Claire, sweetheart, is everything okay?" Which would have landed better if it hadn't been preceded by a decade of silence. I let her talk for a moment, listening to the way she tried to spin the conversation into something productive, something that sounded like love, but felt like containment. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I just said very calmly, "I sent you something else. You should check your inbox again." This time, it wasn't audio, it was a screenshot. An old email, one I'd found earlier that week, while cleaning out an old hard drive. It was dated nearly 6 years ago, sent from the Stanford admissions office, confirming my spot in their incoming graduate program, along with a partial scholarship and a note from the department head, welcoming me personally. I had never shown it to them, never forwarded it, never printed it out. But I had saved it, buried it in digital folders, the same way I had buried the memory of sitting in the living room with my parents, holding that letter in my hands and watching their faces as they told me, as gently as they could, that it just wasn't possible. They hadn't been cruel. They hadn't yelled. They hadn't laughed or dismissed me outright. But they had looked at me with that same tired expression they always wore when the subject turned toward fairness or finances or sacrifice. My mother had rubbed my hand and said, "Claire, you're going to do great things no matter where you go." My father had nodded and said, "You're tough. You'll figure it out." And I had nodded back, like a good daughter does, and quietly erased the dream of Stanford from my future. So I sent them the email now, not as a weapon, not exactly, but as a mirror, a reflection of the kind of forgetting they had done without realizing, the kind of choices they had made under the guise of practicality, never fully grasping what it cost me to be the one who always compromised. On the other end of the call, there was silence, a long one. Then my father cleared his throat, and in that sound alone, I could hear the shift, the slow, creaking realization that maybe the version of events they had clung to wasn't entirely true. But he didn't apologize. Neither did my mother. They just sat there, breathing on the line, unable to fill the space with anything but confusion and discomfort. "I don't need anything from you," I said finally. "I don't need you to take sides or punish Abby or write me a check. I just wanted you to know, because this award wasn't just about a title. It wasn't just a plaque. It was everything I built when no one was looking." My mother tried to say something then, but I ended the call before she could finish the sentence. Not because I was angry, but because I was done explaining myself to people who only listened when silence turned into something they couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, I slept soundly, not because anything had been resolved, but because I had finally said the thing I was never supposed to say. And even if no one responded, even if the silence came rushing back louder than ever, I knew this much. It was no longer mine to carry alone. The truth was out, and that, for now, was enough. There's a peculiar kind of stillness that creeps in after a storm, not the dramatic kind that leaves broken tree limbs and scattered debris across the yard, but the quiet internal sort, the aftermath of an emotional unraveling where everything has been said, yet nothing feels resolved. That's the stillness I sat in the following morning, alone in my kitchen, the plaque still perched on the counter next to the now wilted flowers I had brought home from the party as some half-hearted gesture toward celebration. The petals had begun to droop overnight, a visual reminder that even things meant to be beautiful and cheerful would eventually collapse under the weight of time, neglect, or just the absence of proper attention. I didn't check my phone for hours that day, not because I didn't expect a response, but because some part of me wasn't sure I wanted one. After sending the email, the screenshot of the acceptance letter they had never known about or had chosen to forget, along with the recording of Abby's meltdown, I had felt something close to clarity, not satisfaction exactly, but a strange, sober stillness that comes when you finally stop rehearsing what you'll say and just let the truth speak for itself. There was no anger left in me, no welling resentment, just the sense that I had finally placed the weight back where it belonged, handed it to the people who had built it one brick at a time, and stepped out from beneath it. When I did finally glance at my phone, sometime just after noon, the screen lit up with several missed calls, 2 voicemails I didn't bother listening to, and a message, not from my parents, not even from a cousin or some mutual family acquaintance, but from Abby, just a single line. No punctuation, no preamble, nothing polite or performative. "You really think you're the better sister now." I read it once, then again, and I felt something inside me that I hadn't expected. Disappointment, yes, but also a kind of pity. Not in the condescending way, not in the way that makes you feel superior, but in the way that makes you understand, with painful clarity, that some people live inside stories they're unwilling or unable to rewrite, even when the truth is placed in front of them like a mirror. Abby wasn't mad because I had succeeded. She was mad because my success had dared to exist outside the narrative she had been telling herself all her life, that she was the star, and I was the steady hand behind the curtain, pulling ropes and changing scenery and making sure the light hit her just right. My award hadn't embarrassed her. It had unsettled her. It had introduced the possibility that maybe she hadn't been the only one working hard, sacrificing, building something out of nothing. And that was a reality she didn't know how to sit with. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, not because I wanted to hurt her with silence, but because for once, silence didn't feel like submission. It felt like choice. It felt like the most honest answer I could give to someone who had only ever listened to what suited her version of the truth. Later that evening, just as the sun was setting in that quiet, amber way it does, when you're paying attention, I took a walk down to the beach, barefoot, the sand still warm from the day's heat. I brought the plaque with me, not because I planned on doing anything dramatic with it. No Instagram post, no ceremonial tossing into the ocean like some overly scripted metaphor, but because I wanted to hold it in my hands one more time before putting it away for good. I sat on a piece of driftwood, legs stretched out, waves pulling gently at the shore, and stared at my name, carved into the polished surface. There was something about the way the gold letters caught the fading light that made me feel both proud and a little hollow, like the moment was bigger than the thing itself, like the award was less a prize and more a marker of something deeper, a line between who I had been and who I no longer needed to be. I pulled out my phone and took a photo, not for likes, not for applause, but for me. Just one picture, framed with the horizon in the background, the water soft and steady behind the solid permanence of the plaque. And then, after a long moment, I opened my social media for the first time in weeks and posted the photo with a single sentence beneath it. Finally got to speak without saying a word. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes from old classmates, a handful of congratulatory comments, but within the hour, the post had taken on a life of its own. Former professors, people I hadn't spoken to since undergrad, even old friends from high school who had long drifted away, all started chiming in. They remembered. They saw. One woman wrote, "I always wondered why you were so quiet in those honors meetings. You were brilliant, and no one gave you space." Another, an old family friend, messaged privately to say, "This should have happened a long time ago." The support felt strange, like being wrapped in a blanket you didn't know you'd been cold without. Not overwhelming, not healing, but validating. And somehow, that was enough. There was no grand confrontation. My parents didn't show up at my doorstep. Abby didn't send a second message. Life moved forward in that slow, inevitable way it always does. After the truth has been spoken, but not received. I went back to work. I returned to the rhythm of quiet excellence that had defined me for so long, but something inside had shifted, and I knew it wasn't going to shift back. Weeks later, I received a letter, an actual physical letter from the university, congratulating me again, this time with an invitation to speak at the next convocation. I read it 3 times before setting it down and looking out my apartment window, wondering, not for the first time, what it would feel like to finally be heard on my own terms. Not as an afterthought, not as a whisper, but as someone who had earned her place through the quiet defiance of persistence. And maybe that's what this was always about. Not vengeance, not validation, not even recognition, but liberation. The slow, steady kind that doesn't announce itself with fanfare, but builds quietly in the background until one day you look around and realize the weight you've carried isn't on your shoulders anymore, it's behind you, and you're walking forward, unapologetically, silently, steadily, into a life that no longer requires permission to be seen.